We started by having people 1 year, 5 year, 30 year, so on, standing up. How many people saw Dr. Zhivago here in 1965? There was one ticket window and a line that went to the corner and halfway down the block. I was here with a girl named Joan, and I think it was a good movie. I don't remember. My name's Jim Remminga, and some people know me as the guy that just gets to make things up. You guys get to actually make things, and I've spent most of my career making things up from a design point of view. Mike asked me to talk a little bit about the concept of placemaking, and in the context of Rockford construction, making places. Not only placemaking is kind of a common term today. It's been used for a while now. Lots of government agencies are getting behind it. The governor has a real promotion on placemaking. Placemaking quite often is thought of in the context of public places, streets, parks, plazas, that kind of thing. The idea came from a man by the name of Holly White, who back in the late 60s, early 70s did some studies in New York City around public spaces and how people use public space. And he was quoted back then as saying something to the effect that really the city's life kind of flows through its streets. And in an urban context, the street is very much a part of how we feel and how we relate to our cities, to our neighborhoods, and so on. And the work that we do, that Rockford does, has a great impact on community life, quality of life, how we relate to cities, how we feel about our cities. A year or so ago, Mike gave a talk here on the concept of beauty and how our work affects, how beauty is such an integral part of the work that we do. And beauty is one part of it, a very important part of it. And beauty speaks to the dignity that we experience as we go through nice places. I have this skill that I can change slides by just going like this. Because the computer's way back there and I'm way up here, that was the only way to do it. Specifically, I'd like to talk a little bit about Bridge Street. Obviously, our home now is on the west side, best side. And Bridge Street, what is happening along the Bridge Street corridor, the opportunity for significant change along the Bridge Street corridor is great, and we're in the middle of it. And over the next 5 or 10 years, I think that people are going to drive down Bridge Street and they're going to see it even more change than Wealthy has been. So back when I saw Dr. Zhivago here, the disinvestment that had already occurred on Wealthy Street, and the continued disinvestment up until the time that Rockford came and restored this theater and others restored other buildings along Wealthy Street. Wealthy is considered to be kind of a cool place in town now. It is a place that matters. It's a place that people get in their cars and when you say, what do you want to do tonight? You want to go get something to eat. Wealthy is one of those streets that people come to. And Bridge Street, I think, because it has, we talk about Bridge Street in the context of good bones. The history of Bridge Street, this kind of an image, and I suspect that this image is actually where the expressway has gone through. I think that Swift Printing and our New Holland property and so on is probably in the foreground, and this is beyond that. The big building way in the back on the other side of the river is the old Grand Rapids Brewing. You can see the Lutheran Church beyond that still stands today. So this image is the image of an old streetcar neighborhood. Bridge Street, of course, the west side was a manufacturing. A lot of the furniture companies were right in this neighborhood. A lot of the houses were workforce housing that house folks that walked to work. They got their goods and services on Bridge Street. Bridge Street was also one of the major streetcar lines that kind of broke off and went in a lot of different directions. So there was a lot of traffic on Bridge Street back in the day. Here's a slightly newer image, I suspect maybe from the late 20s, early 30s, based on the Model A's, that kind of shows our neighborhood. The little grocery store on the left is Kale's parking lot. The building immediately next to it is Kale's, and if you look down the road a little bit, you can kind of see the corner of the lingerie shop that that soon we're going to be able to stop talking about, because it's going to be demolished, and new things are coming. Same view looking east on Bridge Street, same era, obviously. The train station, you can see there were tracks along Seward. It was Bridge Street wasn't an industrial area, but you can see that the neighborhood was an industrial neighborhood. The rail traffic and so on, the property where Rockford's office is, and a lot of the property around it were sheds for rail, lumber, and so on, were all over the area, serving the furniture companies. I changed the slide on my iPad, but it doesn't change up here unless I click. So another view looking in the other direction, you can see the closed down pawn shop that is becoming a real estate office, the corner of the tattoo parlor that is on our side of the street. You can see it there. And Bridge Street, for the most part, in this image and the others, was a 1 or 2 story, 3 story, some of the bigger buildings that were closer to the river. But in our neighborhood, mostly smaller buildings, a lot of wood frame buildings, and buildings that didn't have a lot of value when they were brand new. In the context of placemaking then, just a couple of rules of thumb from a design point of view. Quite often, the big difference between an urban area and the suburban area has to do with the placement of the buildings relative to the street. So as you drive down the street in an urban area, it feels much different than when you drive down the street on Plainfield or 28th Street or more suburban auto-centered streets. Having the buildings closer to the street creates a sense of enclosure. There's a psychological impact there, and when you think about places that are memorable, that you want to go on vacation, that you want to go shopping if you go out to eat, downtown Holland, Main Street in Ann Arbor, Ionia in Grand Rapids, they're typically the urban streets that give you this sense of place, and it's, to a large extent, it's the effect of having the buildings close to the rights of way. The height of the building makes a difference too. Most streets are 66 feet, some are wider, some are narrower, but for the most part, the street width, the right-of-way width is kind of a given in urban areas. The height of the building changes psychologically how you feel. Lower buildings give you less of a sense of enclosure, taller buildings give you more, and there are places where the buildings are so tall that you actually feel that you're in a tunnel. The street didn't get any narrower, it's just that the buildings got taller. So from a design point of view and from a context point of view, building new buildings in the context of other buildings that are already there, we have to think about height and width and those ratios, because it has a lot to do with how we feel about place. In urban areas also, walkable streets, a lot of what is memorable and what is attractive is the activities that happen in the buildings. And for the most part, in a walkable street, the first floor is very important, more important design-wise than the upper floors. Although the upper floors is where the density is, whether it's housing or office, that's where most of the people are. But it's the shops and the windows and the restaurants and the outdoor seating and those kinds of things as we walk down the street that give us things to look at, things to interact with. And even if you're not going to any of the stores on this block, it's an interesting block to walk down. So we also think, as we're kind of putting together these pieces on the west side, how do we organize things in a way to make the walk down the street a memorable kind of a walk and something that we would want to go back to. Views that are terminated that have some kind of focal point on the end. We're in the process of closing down a piece of Lexington. just south of our office on the north side of Bridge. And that gives us an opportunity to place a building, a very significant building, on the end of that view. There are places like this where you do special things with architecture, over and above what you might do in some other places. So that's another urban kind of a rule of thumb that's important. Place doesn't have to be totally urban. This is sort of an urban context, obviously a residential development. I'm not sure how old these buildings are. They look like they could be fairly historic. This has a nice scale. It's friendly. It's inviting. And I think that when you really start to judge the value of a place, so others have talked about the value of relationships and how we relate to our clients and how we relate to each other and so on. I think how the things that we make relate to the people that use them. So when you get to the perspective of the person that's going to walk down the street, or that's going to go to the school, or that's going to tour the museum, or work in the factory, or whatever it is that we're involved in, if that person is happy, if that man and his children find this to be a memorable place and they're happy to live there and their family is doing well, I think that we've done a really good job. We've significantly added to the value of our community by creating these kinds of places. And that's a generational thing. So another thing about the work that we do is that it's not just for this moment. It's not that you build something and then you feel good about it, then you go on and build something else. The things that we build are going to be here for decades. And the obligation then, it isn't just good business, but I think there's an obligation, back to Mike's comments about beauty a few all-staffs ago. There's an obligation to really do the absolute best that we can do to create places that people find memorable and that generations, future generations, will find just as valuable. Trees are a big part of that. Green is a big part of that. Grand Rapids, we have nice streets. The work that Rockford has done in the Cherry Street area, you go down a street like this, and there are many examples of things that Rockford had its hands in changing the nature of Ionia. I remember Ionia when it was a scary place. Kurt's got great stories of Ionia back in the day. It's a totally different place now than it was back then. One big difference between Ionia and Monroe Center and some other places that we have done great work in Bridge Street is that Bridge Street, there are more holes in the fabric. Ionia and Monroe Center and so on, it was mostly rehab of existing buildings. Wealthy Street, that's been true so far too. There's not a lot of new construction. Most of it's rehab, and that's very important work. On Bridge Street, we really have the opportunity to build a lot new. So you move a company with hundreds of employees into a neighborhood where that kind of density has never existed. And if you talk to the people that own the restaurants and the folks in the neighborhood, they are so thrilled that Rockford has come to town. So the first thing we did it well. People come into the building every day and they compliment us on what has been done. People that aren't familiar with the area don't have any idea it was an old beater factory that sat vacant for so many years. And I mean, the real joy in doing it from our perspective is that we know what it was and we know that what we turned it into. And people ride by, they don't even know that story, and they still think this is a fine piece of architecture that contributes to the street. The first housing project that we've built in the neighborhood, 600 Douglas, it's a relatively modest project in size compared to the numbers that Mike was talking about, but it's a significant project in terms of how it's been accepted by the neighborhood. 100% occupied, and again, just today we were in a meeting that there were compliments. Next. New Holland is coming, big building, major impact on that block face as far as the gateway into the bridge, into the west side. And then you can see that there is so much more to do. So the white roofs are things that we're working on or talking about. There is one white roof on here that that's a property that we don't control yet, but you can see the significance of what Rockford has invested in terms of land control in the neighborhood and the potential then. So if you take the block, you see our office building in the back to the left here. If you take the block right in front of us and imagine ringing that block with 4 or 5 story buildings, stepping it down, self-parking with maybe a parking ramp in the middle. You see other proposed buildings here that will completely change the face of the Bridge Street neighborhood. And you can see here how much the significance of what's going to be new as opposed to what's existing, which is that difference between Monroe Center and so on. First Street in front of our office, you see a lot of new buildings on First Street, the potential for new buildings. It's going to be a major difference. So just an example in terms of scale and the impact of having architecture on both sides of the street. Here's an image of our office building the way it is now with parking on one side, and we cross Seward to, we park on the one side, we cross Seward to come into the building. If we put even just a relatively modest 2-story building across the street, there's a significant change on how we feel about Seward Street. So we're going to take our parking from Seward Street, we're going to move it to the west side of the building so that we can create architecture where our parking lots are now. And we're talking about maybe even bigger buildings in that area. Standing on First Street looking east, you can see here that new buildings, the Cube, we can repurpose the Cube. We can have new construction all the way down to Turner, getting in behind New Holland, and we can completely change the face of that street that has been kind of languishing through a long period of time now. Now, instead of an old factory, there's a successful office building. We see that the buildings that are proposed along here on the first floor, that they would be occupied by businesses that are compatible with ours. There'll be a synergy there, and First Street's going to become just a great environment. Years ago, I was involved in turning Monroe Center back into a street. It had been a pedestrian mall for many years, and I happened to find a couple of the images that we did way back then. And at the time, I remember most of the storefronts on Monroe Center were vacant at the time. And the reason I'm showing this is that Rockford has had such a significant role in repurposing these buildings, taking the metal panels and creating occupiable space on the upper floors that had been vacant for so many years. And now if you walk down Monroe Center, it's a completely different place. So from the time when you start to imagine what something might be to the time when it actually becomes what it will be, isn't that long. I mean, I'm older, so maybe it doesn't seem as long to me, but I mean, this is our lifetimes, and we think the West Side in the next 5 or 10 years is going to see this kind of a transformation. This was a sketch that I'll just flash on the screen for a minute. This is Rosa Parks Circle. Before there was any dream of being an art museum, this was some artist in Boston's idea of what might happen where Rosa Parks is. And of course, what Rosa Parks has then become, we had the chance of working with Maya Lin, and of course Rockford put up the art museum right next door. And this now, in terms of a civic space, has become just a really major place that people gather in for many different reasons all year long. So New Holland's coming to the west side. That's going to be our next, our first really big thing on the Bridge Street corridor. And so back to that image of the man and his kids. I look here, if you look through all the people having a good time at New Holland, this is New Holland and in Holland, their main store right now. So I would imagine that one day, if you look at this guy holding his little girl waiting for a table, that one day in the New Holland, that little girl's going to come and she's going to be waiting for a table here, and then 20 years from now, her daughter's going to come and be waiting for a table in the same place. And as we are creating place then, and creating memorable places that are worthy of spending time at, we can all ride down the street and feel really proud about that, I think. So, making places, placemaking, call it what you want. In most of my career, I have been designing things, never really got to be involved in building them. Now at Rockford, I get to ride down the street and say, I had a part. Many of you actually did the work, but I had a part in making some of these places, not just designing them. And I think that's just a thrill to be a part of that. And you should all be real proud of the work that you do in that regard.